use $90 as the basis for new loans, with the remaining $10 used to satisfy the 10% reserve requirement. One would assume that the bank would use the $90 deposit for the loan, but that isn't the case. Instead, the bank creates $90 out of nothing on top of the $100 in deposits, so long as there is a demand for new loans. As we'll cover in more detail later, the process of money creation is the primary reason as to why money has been vastly devalued since the inception of the Federal Reserve. Nonetheless, this is why banks want people to deposit money at their bank, because it directly correlates to the amount of money that they can create out of nothing and loan to other people at interest. The more money a bank has on the books, the more money they can lend. The Federal Reserve also has the authority to set what is known as the discount rate, which is the rate in which eligible institutions can loan money from the Fed itself in order to satisfy their mandated reserve requirement. Using open market operations, discount window lending, and reserve requirements, the Federal Reserve can influence the Fed funds rate, which is the interest rate that member banks borrow money from other member banks. The Federal Open Market Committee typically sets a target for the Fed funds rate and uses the aforementioned policy tools to achieve the targeted rate. Much like the Fed's open market operations, they can manipulate the value of money by changing interest rates. By reducing interest rates, the money supply is increased because it becomes cheaper to borrow money. By increasing interest rates, the price to borrow money is increased, which means less borrowing will take place and the amount of money in circulation is decreased. Using these tools, the Federal Reserve can manipulate the supply of money, which allows them to create artificial economic booms and bust. The propagandists in the corporate media call this phenomenon the business cycle, despite the fact that these economic ups and downs are all primarily engineered by the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. In addition to the implementation of the Federal Reserve, the bankers also sought a way to change the Constitution to allow for a tax on an individual's labor. The bankers knew that a central bank would not work nearly as well unless their loans were backed by additional taxation. By 1913, the 16th Amendment, providing the U.S. government the authority to levy an income tax, was ratified by the necessary 3/4 of states. Some have claimed that the 16th Amendment was not actually ratified by the appropriate number of states and is null and void, but that has not prevented its implementation. The U.S. government to this day claims that the 16th Amendment legalized direct taxation on an individual's labor. This claim is false and contradicts numerous Supreme Court rulings. Simply put, the income tax system as it is interpreted today is a complete fraud. Let's first look at the 16th Amendment itself. Even with the 16th Amendment, the Constitution allows the government to levy only two types of taxes, which are direct and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are mandatory unavoidable taxes that must be apportioned or divided equally among the people. Indirect taxes are taxes that can be avoided, like a tax on tobacco or gasoline. Indirect taxes must be uniform or the same throughout all the states. The 16th Amendment did not make an individual's labor a taxable activity, and this is why. First, the definition of income was defined by the Supreme Court in the 1920 Eisner v. McCumber case. In other words, income is defined as gains or profits from business activity and not something that is derived from an individual's labor. Second, in the 1915 Coppedge v. Kansas case, the Supreme Court states in its ruling that personal employment is an exchange, not an activity that results in any sort of gain or profit. Finally, the 1916 Stanton v. Baltic mining case clearly states that the 16th Amendment gave the government no new powers of taxation by referencing the Bruce Arbor v. Union Pacific Railroad Company case in its ruling. Since the government didn't have the power to tax an individual's labor prior to the 16th Amendment, they didn't have it after the fact either. These and other Supreme Court rulings clearly state that the direct taxation of an individual's labor is not lawful because income is defined as a corporate gain and not an exchange. Even the collection of the federal income tax can be considered a violation of the Fifth Amendment, which protects people from self-incrimination. By filling out a 1040 form and submitting it to the IRS, people are required to provide information to the government that can later be used against